One day we'll leave this village, and when we make it, we'll never leave each other behind.
In a small village called Chisomo, where the dust never truly settled and hunger was a familiar visitor, two girls grew up without parents, without comfort, and without anyone to call their own. Their names were Thandiwe and Luyando. People in the village used to say they were like twins, even though they were not born from the same mother. They did not meet by chance. They met on a day that was already heavy with loss. Thandiwe had been sitting alone behind the village market, her eyes swollen from crying, clutching a small torn bag that held everything she owned after losing her parent. She had nowhere to go, no one to call, and no idea what tomorrow would look like. That was where Luyando found her, not because she was looking for her, but because she understood that kind of loneliness too well. Luyando had already been moving around the village, sleeping anywhere she could find, space unwanted, unnoticed. That evening, she had gone behind the market to find a quiet place to rest when she saw Thandiwe. For a while, they said nothing. Two strangers, one pain. Then Luyando sat beside her. "You don't have anywhere to go?" she asked quietly. Thandiwe shook her head. That was how it started. No big moment, no promise, just two broken girls choosing not to be alone anymore. At night, they had no real home. Sometimes they slept behind closed market stalls, curling up on flattened cartons to protect their bodies from the cold ground. Other nights, they found space in an abandoned hut at the edge of the village, a half-broken structure with a leaking roof and cracked walls. When it rained, they would squeeze into one corner, holding each other tightly as water dripped around them. On better nights, if someone in the village showed a little pity, they were allowed to sleep outside the house veranda, careful not to make noise, careful not to be sent away. But most nights, it was just the two of them, sometimes with a thin mat, sometimes without, and the quiet understanding that no matter how hard life became, at least they were not alone. They ate together, suffered together, and slowly made their broken hearts their own. But life did not treat them gently. Before the sun even thought of rising, they were already awake, not because they wanted to, but because survival did not wait. Before they ever thought of school, before dreams had shape, they learned how to walk. In the busy market, where voices clashed and dust rose with every step, Thandiwe and Luyando began pushing wheelbarrows for traders. The loads were heavy, very, very heavy. Bags of cassava, basket of tomatoes, sometimes things too big for their small bodies, but they pushed anyway. From morning till evening, sweat running down their faces, hands blistered, feet aching. Sometimes they walked long distances to help people fetch water from a river that seemed to move farther away each day. Their feet were always sore, sometimes bleeding from sharp stones, but they kept going. Survival did not come easy for them. At the end of it all, the money they received was always too small. Too small. It could barely buy a proper meal for both of them. But still, they woke up the next day and did it again. Thandiwe, however, always did more. While Luyando rested, she kept going. If Luyando pushed one load, Thandiwe pushed two. If Luyando stopped, Thandiwe continued, not because she was stronger, but because she was desperate for something more. And slowly, quietly, she began to save, not for one, but for two, for a future Luyando could not see. From those small savings, another opportunity came. A woman in the market noticed their hard work and allowed them to start hawking oranges and bananas for them. She did not pay them much, just a small token, a percentage from whatever they sold. But to them, it was something. So they carried trays on their heads under the hot sun, calling out to people who barely looked at them. "Sweet, sweet oranges, come and buy fresh, fresh bananas. Very sweet though." Some days they sold enough to eat. Other days They returned with unsold fruits and empty stomachs. Still, Thandiwe held on to something bigger. One day, she made a decision without waiting, without asking. She used her savings and registered both of them in a small, cheap public school. When she told Luyando, her voice carried quiet pride. Thandiwe said, "We will not end here. We have to try." School was not easy. They were not dull. In fact, whenever they managed to attend, they understood their lessons well, but life followed them into the classroom. They were always late, always tired, because before school, they had already worked fetching water, pushing wheelbarrows, hawking whatever they could find. By the time they arrived, lessons had already started, and punishment was waiting. The cane, the shouting, the shame of standing outside while others sat inside. Then, there were the fees. Even though the school was cheap, it was still too much for girls who had to struggle just to eat. Some days they were sent home. Other days, their names were called out in front of everyone. "Go home until you pay." Their classmates laughed, mocked them. "Why come to school if you cannot pay anyways? Market girls. They should just go back selling." These words cut deep. Thandiwe would sit quietly, her hands clenched, her eyes fixed on nothing. Luyando would avoid eye contact, shrinking into herself. But even then, even in the middle of humiliation, hunger, and exhaustion, Thandiwe did not let go. Because while others saw two poor girls struggling to survive, she still saw a future, and she was willing to suffer for it. As they grew older, things became harder. From morning till evening, their voices echoed through the dusty roads, even when their feet hurt, even when the sun burned their skin, even when they returned home with almost nothing. They laughed because they had each other. At night, they lay side by side, staring into darkness. That was when Thandiwe spoke the most. She talked about living, about building something, about becoming someone the world could not ignore. She shared every idea, every plan, every secret, and Luyando listened, quietly, carefully, storing every word. Years passed, they fought their way through school, through hunger, through shame, through exhaustion. There were days they went without food, days they had no books, days they thought of giving up. But Thandiwe worked harder than anyone. She washed clothes, carried loads, did anything she could find, and everything she learned, she taught Luyando. "Come," she would say, "let me show you." Finally, they passed. Not perfectly, not easily, but they passed. And for a moment, it felt like life might change. Then one day, it did. A woman came to the village, Madame Kalumba. She offered them work in Lusaka. To Thandiwe, it felt like destiny. To Luyando, it felt like escape. They left with nothing but two small bags and hope. But the city was not kind. Madame Kalumba was not kind. She shouted at them, overworked them, underfed them. They worked from morning till night as sales girls. Sometimes they slept hungry. Sometimes they cried quietly in the dark. Their room was small, cold and frightening. The walls were cracked. The air smelled of damp wood. At night, rats ran across the floor. The wind whispered through broken windows. Still, Thandiwe did not give up. One day, while running an errand for their boss, she saw something, a small training center. They were training girls and women in tech and even providing laptops. Something inside her came alive. This, this was their way out. She begged, she worked extra jobs, she saved every coin, and finally, she registered both of them. It was not easy. They were always tired, always stressed. But Thandiwe learned fast, very, very fast. She learned coding, systems, ideas. She understood things deeply. And just like before, she taught Luyando everything, every lesson, every code, every connection, every opportunity. "Come, sit," she would say. "Let me show you again." Luyando learned quietly, but something had started growing inside her. Something heavy, something dark. Thandiwe later topped her set in the training program and was awarded 500,000 along with a laptop and a personal phone. With that money, they finally left Madame Kalumba's house and moved into their own small one-room space. They did a little furnishing. Thandiwe even bought Luyando her own laptop and phone. For the first time, it felt like freedom. They began meeting new people, making connections, building relationships. Thandiwe always got more attention and could easily make connections, but she shared everything with Luyando, and slowly, Thandiwe started building something, an idea, simple but powerful. She studied the market, observed people, noticed what was missing, and gradually she began creating something that could change their lives. Then came a big opportunity, a project, a life-changing deal. And like always, she told Luyando everything, every detail, every plan, every connection. And Luyando listened. But this time, she was not just listening, she was taking piece by piece, silently. One day, Thandiwe fell ill. Her body shut down from stress completely. She could not walk, could not think clearly. Something that seemed little at first worsened within weeks, and Thandiwe was bedridden. Luyando had convinced her that it was probably stress-induced, and she believed, so she stayed at home instead of getting proper treatment from the hospital. Luyando had brought a nurse to be taking care of her. For weeks, Thandiwe depended on Luyando. She trusted her completely, and in that moment, Luyando moved. She used everything, the codes, the ideas, the contact, the connections. She stepped into the opportunity meant for Thandiwe and took it. But that was not enough. To secure her place, she destroyed Thandiwe's name. She told lies, deep, painful lies, to investors, to partners, to their professional colleagues, to their professional friends, to anyone who believed in Thandiwe. She painted her as wayward, dishonest, untrustworthy, a fraud, and people believed it because success is loud, truth is quiet. Then came the worst part, Thandiwe's diary, a small book filled with her thoughts, her pain, her dreams. It was taken, twisted, and used against her. Luyando came home daily pretending everything was fine. She painted a different picture, even lying that the investors were no longer interested, which broke Thandiwe's heart. But she was too weak to do anything. She trusted her until one day, everything changed. For days, Thandiwe had been getting weaker instead of better. At first, she believed it was just malaria. That was what she had been told. But something inside her did not agree. Her strength was not returning. Her head felt heavy all the time. Even standing became a struggle. One afternoon, when Luyando had gone out, Thandiwe forced herself up. Her body protested, but something in her mind refused to stay still. She stepped outside, slowly, carefully, and made her way to a proper hospital. By the time she got there, she was already exhausted. The nurses attended to her, ran tests, asked questions. What medication have you been taking? One of them asked. Thandiwe showed the drugs she had been receiving at home, and also told the nurses the symptoms she felt after every dose of injection were administered to her. The nurse paused. There was a look, a small one, but Thandiwe noticed. Who prescribed this? The nurse asked. Thandiwe hesitated. A nurse my friend brought. There was another pause. This time, longer. The nurse exchanged a look with a colleague. Madam, these are not proper treatment for what you have, she said carefully, and the way they were being administered is also not correct. Something inside Thandiwe dropped. Nurse, please, what do you mean? She asked. She said, these medications, taken this way can weaken your body instead of helping you. That is why you are not recovering. Silence. Heavy silence. That was when it started to make sense. Not all at once, but piece by piece. The weakness, the delay in healing, the strange reactions in her body. It wasn't just sickness. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Thandiwe did not panic. She did not shout. She simply nodded, collected proper medication from the hospital and went home. And that was when she made her decision. She would not confront Luyando yet. Not like this. When Luyando's nurse came again that evening, preparing the injection, Thandiwe forced a weak smile. Nurse, I'm tired today. Please, I will just take the drugs, she said softly. The woman insisted at first, but Thandiwe held her ground, pretending to be very weak. Reluctantly, the nurse agreed. From that day, Thandiwe became careful. She hid the hospital drugs, took them quietly when she was alone, and whenever Luyando or the nurse was around, she pretended to be weak, pretended nothing had changed, pretended she was still depending on them. But inside, She was watching, waiting, and healing. Days passed, her strength slowly returned, and with it, her clarity. Then, one day, everything fell into place. Luyando made a mistake. She left her phone behind in a hurry. Calls started coming in, messages, notifications that could not be ignored. Thandiwe picked one. The voice on the other end spoke about payment already made for a project to Luyando. Thandiwe was confused. She checked the phone, and that was when she saw everything: transactions, messages, completed project, receipt of a house Luyando had bought, chats where she was mocking her, calling her names, a poor girl with big mouth and empty hands, messages to investors full of lies. She had said horrible things about Thandiwe to their professional colleagues and other few friends. And the worst part was the chat between the nurse who was treating Thandiwe. Luyando had contacted an unprofessional to act like a nurse, and she gave her instructions to give Thandiwe a certain type of drug, an injection. She told the nurse to put the drugs in a pain relief container, and unknowingly to Thandiwe, the drugs and injection slowed her immune system and made her weak instead of strong. So the little malaria she thought she had worsened due to the drugs Luyando and the nurse had given her because of their plan to make her a vegetable and take everything from her. She spoke carelessly on a call, thinking Thandiwe was asleep. "Just continue like that, she's not getting better anyway," she said with a light laugh. That was when the last piece entered. That was when the truth became complete. Not suspicion, not fear, truth. That evening, Thandiwe did not wait anymore. She confronted her and Luyando. There was no remorse, only bitterness, only hate. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She didn't even pretend. Instead, she laughed, a cold, empty laugh. "You were always going to be too slow," Luyando said. "I just helped things move faster." That was when everything broke. Not the business, not the opportunity, but something deeper. Something that could never be repaired. Trust, sisterhood. The truth became clear. Luyando had taken everything: her projects, all her ideas, her connections, everything she worked hard for, and almost taken her life. She realized Luyando had been jealous of her all this while, since they were little, despite they suffering and enduring together. She realized Luyando had used her to achieve something she had not worked for entirely. Luyando, however, moved to her home on the other side of town and left Thandiwe behind in the one-room apartment. Thandiwe was hurt badly, but she did not fall apart. She did not end there. She became quiet, careful, strong, and she started again. With nothing. It was hard. People doubted her, rejected her, questioned her. She had to fight for her name, prove herself again and again. There were nights she cried, days she almost gave up, but she kept going, and slowly over time, things changed. One opportunity, then another, until one day, everything shifted. Her work spoke, her truth became clear, and Thandiwe rose, not just as a survivor, but as a force, a leading woman in tech, respected, admired, untouchable. And Luyando, her success did not last, because what is built on betrayal cannot stand forever. The truth came out, slowly, painfully, and everything she built collapsed. In the end, she stood alone, in the same loneliness she once watched Thandiwe suffer. Years later, their paths crossed. For a moment, they looked at each other. No anger, no words, just silence. Then, Thandiwe walked away, because she had learned not everyone who calls you sister is family. Not everyone who walks with you is walking for you. And sometimes, the one who knows your story the most is the one who will try to rewrite it. The person you trust the most is the one who studies you the most. Not to protect you, but sometimes to replace you. Dear viewers, if this story taught you anything, let it be this: not everyone who calls you sister is truly for you. So tell me, if you were Thandiwe, would you forgive Luyando, or would you make sure she pays for everything she did? Drop your answers in the comments, and please don't forget to follow for more real African stories like this. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.